So let's start with the introductions today. It is our pleasure to have Dr. Mihaela Metianu here with us today in our coffee chat session to talk about online international students. We also have dear guests and friends here today and also online. Moderating the room, we have Dimitri. And moderating the chat, we have Lisa, who on top of everything that she does, I just found out that she teaches multicultural education in pluralistic societies. So hopefully today we'll have a really interesting and fluid conversation. So going back to our opening questions, we'll open the mics for anyone who would like to participate and tell us about a time when you were playing a game and didn't know the rules, or about a time when you traveled abroad, or your experience learning a second language or a third, like many of these ladies here speak a second and a third language. So who would like to start the conversation? So Lisa, you were gonna read those, right?
Oh, yes, I can certainly do that. Yeah, so Nancy lived in the Palestinian occupied territories for 2 years. And it was very interesting, a very humbling experience for her, since her Arabic is not so great.
Okay. Thank you for that, Nancy. I know the feeling. Anybody else? Rosemary, go ahead.
Yes, I lived abroad my junior year abroad, which is what it was back in the day, a long time ago. I lived in France for a year, studying with NYU.
Okay.
And it was fabulous, and it changed my entire life, set the course for my entire life, really, actually.
Yes. Anybody else?
So,
Dr. Munson?
My name's Marcella Munson. Yes, I also did my junior year abroad, and it was in France. It was also in Paris. Yes, and it had a life-changing effect on me as well.
Okay. Okay.
That's pretty powerful to think of the impact that we're having on the students who are here
Yes.
now.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes.
It's true.
Can I ask them a question?
Of course.
Both of you were in France. Did you guys also know French well enough while you did your study abroad?
I
You did? Okay.
I went to France with what I would call advanced level listening and reading comprehension and probably high intermediate speaking. And it was really the living there that brought me up to the advanced level. It's hard to achieve without actually living in community.
Right. Right.
And I would say about the same for me. And I remember that, that part of the goal was to be able to speak like a French person. The way I didn't say it was like a French person. Was since I was about 4, that was my goal. But so that being said, the courses were in lingua, so it's a study abroad program in lingua, with the goal being to perfect your skills in the language.
Lori, would you like to join us? Just bring your chair over here. Will anybody else like to share their experience?
Yes. I can share my experience since I've gone abroad, but I've not studied abroad. So I've been the person that's gone there and didn't know the languages that they went to visit. And that can be from Asia to Europe. So, but I survived, I was going to say, because when you're immersed, you learn quickly, at least words can go one word can go a long way to meaning a lot. But I would say visiting abroad, what was nice was I felt everybody was welcoming. And they kept apologizing for their English, which I kept telling them to stop because I really was in their country. But it made me realize what it might feel like not knowing how to read and write when I was in another. I thought, I can navigate around. I'll know landmarks. They all started looking alike or being the same. So that's the idea of not a game and not knowing the rules, you feel left out. That's what I would say.
That was my experience growing up. I grew up with 3 boys. Being the only girl, they're super competitive. So every time we played the same game, they would change the rules. So I always felt I was at a disadvantage. And to this day, I'm not ever going to play anything with my brothers because I know they're going to do the same. So the reason we brought these questions today was to get us situated into what an international student feels when he or she comes to experience the academic life in the U.S. Go ahead, Dr.
Can I
Manson.
just add one anecdote
Sure,
here? That's
of
speaking
course.
the game.
Uh-huh.
So I arrive in Paris. I've never really been out of the U.S. before, and I'm a junior in college, right? And a young one at that. And I remember waking up in the morning in this hotel room and hearing the maids outside, and I could understand what they were saying, but it's that moment when you suddenly realize that this language is their real language.
Yes.
So if the fire alarm
Yes.
rings, it's not like people are, okay, now we're going to break into the real language, which is English. No,
Yes.
I mean, this is the language that they
Yes.
inhabit.
Yes.
And this is what it really happens. It's not monopoly money language. That was a real eye-opener.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah, like there's no changing this back to what I'm comfortable with. This is what I need to live with doing this. Okay. Alrighty, so moving on. I already introduced our guests today, so we're gonna do these in the coffee chat format as a community of practice. A community of practice means we are having a fluid conversation with equal voice. We're here to hear what you guys have to say and to share our common experiences, because this is what allows us to learn from each other. And in a community of practice, we're mutually responsible for each other's learning. So at any time, please let us know when you have a comment or a question. And I do have a question for you, Dr. Metianu. Our first question is there such a thing as an international student?
So, first of all, before I answer that question, I just want to thank you for inviting me to present today, and to my colleagues here who are linguistic experts. I would like to add to the previous comments. I wanted to hear everyone's comments before, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself to situate this in context. I came to the US as a college-age student. And I was relatively proficient in English, especially in written English, although it was British-style written English. And so I got many red marks on my papers from my American professors, but they were all well-intentioned and not punitive at all. I will tell you that the cultural change and knowing the norms of the culture that you live in is just as important as knowing the language, the academic language specifically for our international students. Think about not just going to live in a country, but also being able to successfully navigate the academic norms and all that comes with it. And since we're talking about international students and perhaps non-native English speakers in the online environment, that adds another dimension. We also have to learn how to operate within those rules. So with that in mind, I would like to answer this specific question. Is there such a thing as an international student? Yes, there is. There are many ways of defining international students, but for the purpose of this conversation, we are going to focus on students who are here specifically for the purpose of studying in the United States. They are probably on a non-immigrant student visa. It could be an F1 or a J1 visa, and they might be here for the duration of an academic program, or perhaps for a much shorter stay for an exchange experience, like some of my colleagues described here. And so that's sort of, let's say that's our legal definition in terms of the parameters, because when here at FAU, we have many students who might consider themselves international because maybe they're a third country national. Maybe they've lived in another country and now they're repatriated. Maybe their parents are from somewhere else. But for today, the legal definition will be exactly that: students who are here on a non-immigrant visa to study in the United States. A little bit about FAU's international population. I will share a handout with Maria, and she will share it with you about the statistics for this coming fall as it compares to previous years. But we do have students from 107 different countries who come here to study in the United States. Our international student population is very, very diverse. Our top 3 countries are China, Brazil, and India. So Brazil moved ahead of India more recently. And our split between graduate and undergraduate students has changed over the last 5 years, whereas we were more than half graduate. Now we're a little bit more than half undergraduate. And that obviously creates a different dynamic in terms of the services and support that we have to provide to undergraduate students as well. For practical purposes, I think we have to understand that our international students are not all like one big group, right? There are a lot of diverse elements that go into it. One might be their own individual ability to become flexible and to get acclimated to a new environment. Their language background, whether or not they come from an environment where they have heard and written a lot of English, or perhaps their native language is closely associated with English versus other languages that are not. I went to Finland a few weeks ago for a conference, and if you know about Finnish, it's not related to almost anything else. So fortunately, they are very fluent in English, but I could not make up any words, which is very unusual for me. I can make up a lot of words from various languages, but that one particularly, I could sound it out, but not understand any words. So we have to think of what the students bring in with them, academically, what they can transfer from their first language, how strong they were in their first language, how culturally malleable they are, and how much we can support them to adjust. And so all of those things make our international students not one big body, right? It's just like when you talk about your Latinx students, they're not all one big body. They all have various needs and backgrounds, and they bring different things to the table. As far as identifying your international students in the classroom, I have been thinking about whether or not it might be a good thing to offer that option to faculty where we can tell them who their international students are, but I'm not sure if it works with everybody. So international students in your classroom, you may or may not be able to distinguish them. But perhaps one tip might be if you want to know who they are, perhaps you can put something in your class information to say, if you're an international student, or if your first language is not English and you want to self-identify, please let me know. And perhaps you can provide them some assistance. By no means do I say you have to change any assignments for them, but if with that information, you may look at an assignment that you give and take that into account, or perhaps look at what they turn in and give them the opportunity to maybe make revisions, or perhaps look at the content in a different way, away perhaps from some of the grammatical errors, for example.
Nancy has a comment.
Yes,
Okay.
and I have a couple comments too. Go ahead, Nancy.
She mentions, I have had quite a few students that live in France, Israel, Japan, Bahamas, and South and Central America,
Right.
taking my online courses, and I really need to keep in mind that they're in a different country and that the topics we're covering may be different there.
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely. That's such a good point to bring, because it's in a way the same thing that you should take into account in your own physical classroom, but the space is even larger. It's more global. The topics that we cover in classrooms, depending on the subject, may or may not be culturally accessible to students. Maybe they don't understand the cultural trivia or things that you bring into the classroom, and the context. You have to set the context and kind of give students the opportunity to learn. I wouldn't say take that out of your class, but perhaps give opportunities for students to bring other examples from their own setting, from their own culture, so that they can feel like they're participating in a more meaningful way.
Nancy wants to be unmuted.
Go ahead, Nancy. You're unmuted.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Nancy.
I just found this topic very interesting. I was just putting in the chat that I'm part of a fully online program, so we have students. I've had students in Japan, France, South America, Central America, where they're in a completely different setting, and I teach health administration. And I love the last example that the presenter mentioned, where trying to bring in kind of like their experience to enrich the discussion going on. So we talk a lot about different, hospitals and how the healthcare system works. And what I've been doing is, since each semester I've been having students from other countries, I kind of let them bring their examples and their experience with their healthcare system kind of to the table, to the discussion. So we can also get a better idea instead of just focusing. We usually focus on the U.S. healthcare system, kind of get a feel for how it's being run in other countries when it comes to access and quality. So it's very important, I think, to keep that in mind, and you kind of have to play around with the way you're teaching the course when you have students, I think, well, at least in my case, where they're actually located in other countries and English isn't their first language.
Yes.
Thank you, Nancy.
Go ahead, Rosemary.
I was going to say, and we both Dr. Munson and I, we teach French in our department, and our classrooms, our foreign language classrooms, are kind of like an international student experience for the student who's not an international student. So we have a lot of experience with situations of putting students in a situation where they don't really know the language. It might not be very comfortable. We're talking about topics in a way that they're not accustomed to. So really, it's a great, and we have online courses and face-to-face courses as well. And then sometimes we have native speakers who take our French classes. So they have to learn, the academic French, even though they speak French fluently. So there are a lot of opportunities in our department to experience it all the time, really. So, we could potentially, even for international students, somehow maybe provide some kind of additional insight for them.
Yes.
And like Rosemary was saying, it's really a wonderful experience, for all of the students in the class. And I have to say, even the professor, I always tell people about my job interview here at FAU. So, I was coming from UCLA, and so I had my teaching demo materials, and I was demoing a class of beginning French 1. And so I had gotten the materials ahead of time, and it was a portion in the beginning language book where they were deliberately doing that francophone thing, where they weave in francophone culture and background into what would otherwise be metropolitan French, dominant. And so the unit was talking about fruits and vegetables, plants that grow in tropical climates. And coming from California, it was all entirely foreign to me, right? And so I was walking into this expecting that it would be that way for the students as well. And I walk in, and it's immediately obvious that many of the students in the class are from various parts of the Caribbean, many with French Caribbean heritage background.
Right.
And so I'm clearly, I realize I'm kind of the outsider, the newbie, the student, right?
Yeah.
And so, I, remember taking that section of the textbook and, almost metaphorically tossing it over my shoulder. Like, okay, so you guys, so a banana plant, you guys have seen banana plants growing. This is fascinating. So tell me about banana plants, right? And it was just an entire reversal.
Right.
Yeah, right. That's the thinking on your feet moment. Since we're on the slide, I do want to mention that international students who are here in the United States are restricted to how many online courses they can take. And there is a specific requirement for them to take no more than 3 credits out of their minimum full-time load that is completely online. And for FAU purposes, that's a course that's completely online, not a hybrid course. And that is an immigration requirement. There's nothing we can do about it. It doesn't completely make sense at all times, but it's something that I always try to remember our faculty, especially because we will have instances where we will ask students to move to a not online session for that particular reason, so they can maintain their immigration status. So, and then we've kind of addressed the students who are abroad. Through Nancy's question, of course, you will have students in your online classes, hopefully more and more, that reside outside of the United States and take advantage of our fully online programs or perhaps some other courses that we have online.
And we have another comment from Cindy Bloom, who's not able to use her microphone, but she said her primary experience is with graduate students in nursing education courses. And she said the last couple she's seen are from Saudi, and they share not only, as Nancy was saying, the differences in the healthcare system, as well as the differences in the curriculum, and they Yeah, there we go. In the healthcare system, and as well as with the nurse's role,
Mhm.
which
Right.
who would have thought is that different from
Different.
place to
Yes.
place, but of course
Yeah,
it
it's
would
very
be.
different.
Yeah.
Dr. Munson, do you have a comment or a question?
Oh, it was just a question for clarification. Are they allowed to take 3 online credits per term or only 3
Per
credits?
term.
Per term. Okay.
Per term, yes.
So before we move on, I thought it was very interesting because the first time we did this, I thought, and Judy and myself, we talked a lot about students self-identifying as international or second language. And since we have faculty here in the room and on the chat, how would you feel about that? I would like to hear. Do you think that's a good idea to have your students self-identify? Is that something you actually do in your classes?
Well, for our foreign language classes are rather small in nature, so we do have the opportunity to get to know students very well. And
Right.
obviously, in an online class, they need to introduce themselves.
Right.
So, of course, there's the international student, like from the legal standpoint. Then there are
Right.
the students. Our students are very diverse, who happen to
Yes.
be from another country,
Yes.
but they're not technically an international student.
Right.
So there really doesn't need to be a distinguishable difference. Only I think it would be good to know, because we could maybe create sort of a conversation with them, because between instructor and that student, because there may be ways that they can contribute to the class by sharing sort of their experience of being studying in a foreign country, because we're studying a foreign language in this country. Do you see what I'm saying? It could really sort of give them an opportunity to feel like they're kind of have already experienced something that the others maybe haven't experienced. So
Of
they could
course.
really kind of take the lead on something if they wanted to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's enough room in the class in terms of time and spaces to do such a thing, because the classes are not that big.
Right,
Would be
right.
very beneficial.
I think there are some contexts where perhaps this conversation does not come as naturally because of the subject matter of the course. And in those cases, obviously, it would be completely up to the faculty member. But imagine teaching American government online to an international audience who has not taken any courses specifically in American government. There are some sort of background pieces that might take longer for an international student or someone who hasn't grown up here to understand, but there's also an opportunity to do some comparative studies with other types of systems around the world. So hopefully some of you will consider that in terms of perhaps internationalizing a piece of your curriculum, if applicable, even outside of the courses that are obviously lending themselves to that.
Okay. Lisa, do we have any comments or questions before we move on?
No, I think we're good. I think what I'm going to be doing is engaging folks. I'm going to put a couple of other questions up here in the chat
Okay.
to engage folks as you are continuing on with the conversation.
Okay. So let us know if there's something at any point where you want me to get back to you.
Oh, I definitely will. Well, as you know, Cynthia had a question that was read aloud, and then Dr. Munson had a question about credits.
Okay.
Other than that,
Yes. Okay, so our next question, and we already kind of covered some of it, are the challenges international students face in general at FAU. We talked about that, but I don't know if there's something else you or anybody in our audience would like to mention, something we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, so I think our academic culture is a very important piece to student success, and it takes some time to adjust to it and to understand. And so the more explicit and clear we are upfront, the better it is. I know that things are very different now in terms of what faculty are expected to do, but I can tell you my own experience. I'm sure someone told me what a syllabus was, but I had never seen a syllabus in my life. I did not know that I had to read it, and I learned the hard way, which is by missing an assignment. And you learn that way too, and that's fine. But the more explicit we are upfront with our expectations, with the clear communication, And then on the side of my office, partnering with you to make sure that we communicate the same messages to the students, the better off everybody will be in the end. Obviously, there's the written component and the verbal communication. They both play a role in how students succeed. And even though English is an international language and it's that mode of communication across many nations, when it comes to academic English, it takes about maybe 7 to 10 good years to become really fluent in academic writing and communication. For anybody who comes with some kind of basis, it won't happen overnight. I still, when I'm tired, for example, struggle with some things. I no longer revert to counting in my native language, which is Romanian, but I did that for a long time. And so we should think about those things. I'm not going to talk about maintaining status because we talked about it on the other slide, but I'd like the rest of the audience to communicate with us before I move to the financial piece.
So on academic culture, I know plagiarism is huge because in many countries, including my country, Venezuela, it is not a thing. So this is something that we normally tell our faculty. This is a big piece of the shock international students get when they get here. And many of us tend to be punitive about finding plagiarism when what really happens is that these students do not know how to do differently. So what do you think about that?
So I think academic honesty and plagiarism as part of that is something that we also have to repeat. I would say not just to our international students, but to all of our students. The challenge is distinguishing between what it is willful versus unwillful. And I know that there are international students who were given opportunities and chose to ignore it. But speaking about those who want to do the right thing, I think the most difficult piece is paraphrasing, for example, and understanding how to combine content without changing the meaning, and how that takes practice, right? So anything that you do, if you want to do it well, you have to do it about 10,000 times. I would like to quote where I heard that from, but it was on an NPR show. So I, just to give credit where credit is due, but it does take a lot of practice. And if you see a student who does really well in that, it's because they've put in a lot of time. It takes a lot of hours, especially in the beginning. And without that, it's very difficult to achieve. So it does take extra work for students to do that.
It also really, I have to say, it really pays off to work with students on developing their specifically academic vocabulary.
Yes.
Because otherwise they really will be gravitating toward that perfectly phrased phrase. And it is a beautiful phrase, but it's somebody else's, right?
Yes.
But giving them alternate verbs, alternate formulas, things like that to help them.
So that being said, I think we were talking about in the beginning about not knowing the rules. So we can say the rules, but they can even state in the syllabus, and they can even have a syllabus quiz. And this goes for all students as well. But to really, I think this sort of what's coming to light here is that it would be good for it to be disclosed that a student is an international student, because then we can take these things into consideration, knowing, and I've seen it with students even writing doing presentations or things in French, the same thing. And I know that in some countries in South America, it's okay to do that. Yes. So once I knew that, then it was an easier dialogue to say, I know that in your country you can do that, but here we can, and this is how, and this is why. Yes. So if we have that if faculty have that information, even in greater detail to know that this is acceptable in these countries, we sort of go into it with a different attitude.
And that idea of, I don't understand why I'm being punished, why points are taken off, I really don't know. So that is important to have that conversation. I know Lori wants to say something.
From a library standpoint, I think it's important to know some of the resources that you have. Yes. So we actually have APA Bootcamp as a 24/7 type of video that 2 different videos that people can watch. And knowing that students have resources. As a graduate student, when I was going through library science school, I had somebody who was working on her 3rd master's. She was Chinese. She was from Taiwan. And I was reviewing her papers for her. And I've done that for several other people who are not Native American
Right.
speakers. And I also work with editing a journal, and I have that same problem. So I think that when students can have somebody come alongside them that they trust, that they can work with, whether they're paying them or they're just friends who can help them along the way, that goes a long way towards making them feel comfortable and understanding that they have support, because everybody likes that safety net.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for that, Lori.
And we'll ask you to, when you do speak up, to step over this way closer, because we're picking things up in this mic and you were a little bit too far away.
Sorry.
That's okay.
We have another
I just
comment.
comment. I like your comment about like the examples of understanding, because I didn't realize that that nobody would understand. Not everybody would understand that question.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the rules. You may put it in a syllabus, you may state it, but we still don't understand what that. I mean, I would be
Yes.
totally
You
lost
have
if
to
you never
practice
do
it,
it. You
yes.
still wouldn't even know what that meant. So
Yeah.
you would need examples,
Mm-hmm.
and it's terrible. The first time you get caught is when you turn something in that you probably worked really hard on as a student, and then you're crushed. Because I've had students come in. I'm on the other end of working with students, and they're crying because they're like, and I'm like, you're not in trouble yet, because I knew the faculty was doing it to try to help. I said, you did it in advance. They want you to come in. They're going to sit down. You need to
Right.
do this, and you're great, but I never. Thank you. I mean, that was kind of eye-opening. I just
Well,
never
we're also
realized
faced
it.
with students using online translation tools, so I tend
Okay.
to always overstate. It's got to be in your own words. It's not a Pulitzer Prize nomination. It's just got to be in the French of the language. If it says, I eat fish, I eat broccoli, whatever, depending on the level,
Right.
that's okay. It's about you producing something.
Yes.
And so, like I said, I really, really, really overstate,
Yeah.
and
Really.
and it's some slip through the cracks, but typically I find that it can never be overstated too many times, is what I feel. Really.
Plus, Google Translator is not that great.
That's what comes up with some crazy
It's a
things.
great
We have some questions over
Yeah.
online.
Yes. Go ahead.
Nancy, did you want to open your
We
mic?
do. Are we going to open Nancy's microphone, or should I read her chat?
Either way is fine.
All right. Well, so Nancy usually offers to review the student's paper or outlined assignment before submission, and she's saying that this offer is always sent out to the whole class, but she notices that those students that are international usually take advantage and open up about their difficulties taking a course in English.
Mhm.
And she also notices that specific concepts in healthcare, like access or how insurance works here in the U.S., would not be completely clear,
Mhm.
especially to students from France or Israel, since the healthcare is government funded. So students do not have to worry about how much services are covered in her class. It definitely makes the course so much easier. It's fun and interesting. And she's had students that were very open to talk about the differences that they have learned about when it came to experience with the healthcare system as well. Very, very interesting.
Yes,
Thank you,
very
Nancy, for
interesting.
sharing all that.
What a great learning opportunity.
Yes. So I have one more thing to talk about, and it's rubrics.
Okay.
So the idea that to our students, when we say explain briefly, what does briefly mean in a culture that is different from the American culture? So things that we do not normally think about the need to explain your rubric to your students. Go ahead.
And I'll add to that also in terms of what a thesis statement is
Uh-huh.
or where it goes, right?
Right.
So in the
Yes.
European tradition, the French tradition, your thesis statement is sort of this grand revelation at the end, and it's the meandering path that leads up to it, and then boom, there's the impressive statement at the end. But it's not something you state first and then prove.
Right.
They feel that takes all the skill
Excitement.
excitement out of it. Yes.
Which I'm sure it does.
Well, on the other hand, I have to say that when I found the 5-paragraph essay, I thought that was the biggest relief of my life.
Yes.
Because it takes away some of the subjectivity, in my opinion, and you could still be creative with it and have that.
Sure.
Then your conclusion becomes, okay, what else could we do next, kind of thing. So it can be just as exciting, but it's totally a different way of thinking and presenting your material.
Definitely.
So I'm a little bit more of a linear thinker, so it did work for me very well. So before we move on to this next slide, I just quickly want to say that just like any other students that you might have, international students do face other challenges besides what's happening in the classroom and culturally. Their families fund their education in a lot of cases, but they do have financial challenges sometimes. They have challenges with resources that we cannot solve as easily through a visit through the financial aid because they're not eligible for that. There are things that happen in their country that can affect their currency and the well-being of their family. Mm-hmm. And so just like with other students who are, say, special populations, this population sometimes may experience those challenges as well. And that's something that we need to account for when we engage with our international students, whether in person or online.
Okay, and because this is a game, we're gonna put the ball back on the field of our guests, because Dr. Metianu had a question for you. So what are some of these strategies that you would put into place to meet the needs of students? So we talked a lot about their challenges, their needs in your practice, having international students. What are some of the things that you do to somehow level up that play field for your students? And we open the mics again.
And of course, Nancy addressed that in the offer to review the papers.
Yes.
That's an excellent strategy.
Yeah. And that is why I am such a fan of resubmissions, because that gives you that opportunity.
Well, I think the more aware we are, first of all, that we have an international student, and then some of the differences in the academic format of certain things, plagiarism, where you put your thesis statement, maybe not something in great detail, but at least if we all had that knowledge from the start, it would just help the student more, obviously, just having that knowledge. And what you were just saying about the other challenges that they face, if their currency gets devalued and things like that, I think just a little list of things that, challenges international students might face could be beneficial to all faculty to know that. Because even though I'll think of that, and I'm very interculturally, globally aware person, I believe, I might not have thought of all those things in the specific context. So I'm grateful to have more information so I can really keep that into consideration, take that into consideration.
Happy to share that. It's a great suggestion. Yes. Please.
I'm interested in your insight on this. So when we're working with our international students, and I'm going to jump off of Nancy's comment about her offer to review a paper ahead of time, okay? So bringing community into the online classroom, how could we, or how do you, as a strategy, how do you bring the students in so that we can celebrate the diversity in our online environment?
If it's a class that's fully online where you don't have the face-to-face time with students, I still think that there are opportunities through video chats, opportunities to get students to share. And in some cases, especially with students currently, it might actually be easier to share online than in person. So that student who came in or turned in the assignment online for you to review may be too shy to come to your office face to face. So giving, even in classes that are not online, giving alternatives, either come in person or submit online, may actually be a good thing. So you can design assignments around celebrating your class virtually. Students, I think, are very apt to do that if you give them the space to engage in that way. And I'm going to defer to some of my other colleagues who actually teach on a regular basis to share what maybe they do in the online space to engage with students.
Well, we have obviously the student introductions are a big part, and then students commenting on the student introductions. And for example, in French 1, I have something 2 weeks in right away. It's called Meet and Greet and Bon Appetit. So we talk about, we kind of talk about the things we learned in French 1, and it's very kind of informal. I don't have the entire class. It would just be too much. But I feel it's important too in these online oral exams or conversations, whatever you want to call them, is that I leave myself a lot of time because also students, maybe they never used WebEx before, maybe they never used a webcam before. So there are a lot of elements that could make any student feel uncomfortable. So I think just engaging with them right away and then finding things that are similar among students so they can kind of gravitate toward each other is extremely helpful. And then keeping up that dialogue throughout in many ways, of course. But that initial seeing you, they hear me, they see me, I'm a real person, they see each other, and kind of can relax and breathe if they're having issues, technical issues, just, okay, we have 30 minutes, don't worry, we'll get the echo gone, so sort of make it a very comfortable space.
Yeah. And even in subjects that again don't maybe lend themselves as easily to this, even little captions or cultural trivia about a concept, say in math or in physics, that originated in a different culture in a different part of the world. Did you know that, etc. That you never know who's in that classroom who might be able to say, oh yes, that's where I'm from, and that really helps people to feel acknowledged in some way, and it also helps those who've never thought about that to learn that everything was not born in North America. So not everything is created here. So there are other ways to do that. It takes a little bit of creativity, and if there is interest in that, we can certainly continue that conversation.
So this is another interesting question. So by not knowing what they're facing, their needs, not knowing that, for example, plagiarism is not punished in other countries, but not knowing their personal situations, can we be making things even more difficult and making them feel at a disadvantage? Obviously not intentionally, but I thought this question was very interesting that you thought about that.
Well, so of course, and I think this will happen regardless of our conversation here today. It's just part of engaging with people. I don't think anybody wants to intentionally exclude anybody from participation, from access, but certainly perhaps not taking the time, and I know there's so much content to deliver in any given class, but not taking the time to give students the opportunity to self-disclose perhaps could put them at a disadvantage. Finding out maybe how long they've been in the United States and what particular familiarity they have with the academic environment. If it's their first semester here, of course, that would make things a little bit more difficult. But I want to give the next few minutes just to the rest of the audience to comment on this or anything else that you would like to comment on, and perhaps even ideas of how we can continue this conversation in the future.
Well, I'm going to jump in and say that I think a really positive resource is going to be the library to be able to access both face-to-face and virtually to be able to get some support for them.
Yes, and the library has been a great partner for the Center for International Students in so many ways.
I think if we could have a list of countries, if students don't want to self-identify, if we have a list of countries that are represented in the class, we can then say, oh, I have a student from, France. No, I have a student from wherever, okay, Saudi Arabia. Can I find some kind of connection with the content and just randomly put it in there? It's just random.
Right.
So if that way, and maybe do others as well so it's not so obvious, just to have that for faculty to have that information, we can really do a lot with it.
So there's a last comment in the chat about leveling the play field without lowering expectations.
Correct. Yes.
So that's a very delicate balance there. Go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is exactly what we're talking about, right? Knowing our students well enough so that we are meeting their needs spot on, and not making assumptions that a language barrier, let's say, means that we need to lower expectations conceptually for our students. That is something that we should not be doing.
Absolutely.
Right? We have to make sure we know them, and I really like Nancy's idea about offering to the entire class, some sort of support. so that you can get to know them a little bit more personally by working with them one-on-one or in smaller groups. I think that's a brilliant idea.
Yes.
Anything you can use in terms of universal design for your
Yes.
class will help everybody, and
Yeah.
without lowering or creating the impression that you're maybe lowering the quality of the content for some students or helping them more than others.
Right. And that will be it for today.
Okay, went by fast.
Yeah.
It
always
didn't know.
does.
And maybe to
Yes.
be continued.
Maybe.
Some of us will be here next week, right? Ms. Judy?
Absolutely. Next week, we're gonna be doing a little panel discussion, again, like this, somewhat virtual, somewhat face-to-face, with the 2019 Excellence in Online Learning Award panelists. So yeah, we're gonna,
And one of the recipients of that award is
it
actually in
happens
this
to be
room.
here. Yeah. So we'll be sharing that information out probably later on
Yes.
in the next few days.
Yes, and I want to thank Dr. Metianu and the rest of our participants today for making this a wonderful conversation.
Both
Thank you for
in-house
having
and
us.
online.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
That was really, this is what makes these things so exciting
Yes.
for us, I'll
Yes.
tell you.
Yes.